We the People's News. Here we have Barack Obama's radio interview, and he was a senator telling you what social justice is. It's redistribution of wealth. He did it to our wealth, and he did it to our future wealth. $10 trillion of our future wealth. And this is what he was all about, and this is what he's poisoning America with. And this is actually globalism and the weakening of America so globalism could take over America.
Good morning and welcome to Odyssey on WBEZ Chicago 91.5 FM. And we're joined by Barack Obama, who is Illinois State Senator from the 13th District and a senior lecturer in the law school at the University of Chicago.
You know, if you look at the victories and failures of the civil rights movement and its litigation strategy in the court, I think where it succeeded was to vest formal rights in previously dispossessed peoples, so that I would now have the right to vote. I would now be able to sit at a lunch counter and order, and as long as I could pay for it, I'd be okay. But the Supreme Court never ventured into the issues of redistribution of wealth.
We are 5 days away from fundamentally transforming the United States of America.
And sort of more basic issues of political and economic justice in the society. And to that,
In his eyes, rights weren't good enough. We owe more. And is not that isn't freedom priceless? Isn't everywhere else in the world we still have slavery? India is like 19 million slaves. There's 40 something million slaves, 43 million slaves in the world today. And that's what I don't understand about this argument. If you were granted the freedoms, we have fought for them same freedoms, and everybody in America has them. So what else is there to distribute?
extent, as radical as I think people tried to characterize the Warren Court, it wasn't that radical. It didn't break free from the essential constraints that were placed by the founding fathers in the Constitution, at least as it's been interpreted, and Warren Court interpreted it in the same way, that generally the Constitution is a charter of negative liberties.
So here, constitutional professor, lawyer Obama, so claimed, thinks he knows more than the ones that wrote the Constitution, and there's a reason our Constitution is negative rights and not positive rights, because that is what produces freedom, individual rights. The right to own property is something that no one, before everything in Britain, like in Britain, was owned by the king. So you were a serf. You only could get what the king gave you. That's it. You were basically a slave to the king. This idea of freedom that he is disgracing, and he just doesn't understand it properly, even though he's supposed to be a professor of law, constitutional law at that.
Says what the states can't do to you, says what the federal government can't do to you, but it doesn't say what the federal government or the state government must do on your behalf.
Must do on your behalf. And that's what he was all about. It's about faith in the government. The government solves all your problems. You know, the government isn't giving you enough. He goes in, that's what community organizing is, going in and agitating those that are already upset, that have little. It's easy to agitate people that have little. It's a sham.
And that hasn't shifted. And one of the, I think, the tragedies of the civil rights movement was because the civil rights movement became so court-focused, I think that there was a tendency to lose track of the political and community organizing and activities on the ground.
After all, his claim to be president was he was a community organizer. That's a quote from him. And in reality, community organizers agitate perceived oppression. And that is not uniting, it is dividing. That's why we today have such a divided country, because they have divided us all into tribalism, race, gender, oh, you name it. They make up new names every day. And if you don't comply with what they say, they call you a Nazi or a white supremacist or oligarchy, you or evil, or they got all kinds, xenophobe. I mean, how many phobias are there? Islamophobe because you don't agree with Islam. There's so many.
That are able to put together the actual coalitions of power through which you bring about redistributive change. And in some ways, we still suffer from that.
Redistributive change. You mean like spending $10 trillion, more money than all the presidents combined in history? How about America's future money that he redistributed all over the world and to his cronies? And he purposely hurt America's economy to weaken it for the takeover of UN control. The migration policy would have been the first step, the act that was just signed by 162 UN countries. Now they're saying we're in violation of international law, and they the UN is trying to control our laws and what we do, just like the EU does Britain, why Britain wants out.
Let's talk with Karen. Good morning, Karen. You're on Chicago Public Radio.
Hi. The gentleman made the point that the Warren Court wasn't terribly radical. My question is, with economic changes, my question is it too late for that kind of reparative work economically, and is that the appropriate place for reparative economic work to take place?
You mean the court?
The courts, or would it be legislation at this point?
Yeah, maybe I'm showing my bias here as a legislator as well as a law professor, but I'm not.
To you about that. Now look, like I said, it goes right along with the UN, and what they're trying to push. UN panel says the U.S. owes reparations to African Americans, and what I don't, and I just want to show you that this is from PBS. All right, PBS NewsHour. Then we click over here, and we got PRI. I'm not sure who they are, but I look at everything. And what's interesting here is they got a picture of House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi sits with Representative John Conyers from Michigan during a panel discussion at U.S. Capitol about Trump's immigration refugee ban, blah, blah, blah. Since 1989, this representative, that means he's been there that long, he's introduced into the House floor H.R. 40, the Commission to Study Reparations Proposal of African Americans Act, a total of 14 times. And we still got another one from Washington Post, saying the same thing about the U.S. panel. Now, what's interesting about all that is they make no mention of Islam and slavery, which is still selling slaves. We've written about it at We the People's News. They're still selling slaves. In Libya today, CNN did a piece, went undercover, showed everything. We have it in our article in We the People's News.com. And India, the country of India, 19 million slaves there. You can look it up and Google it. There's 43 million slaves, more than there's ever been in the world, but only Americans, and I think in British they pushed this too. We are the only ones that owe reparations for anything, even though people are still selling slaves. Saudi Arabia sells slaves. It's just unbelievable, this white guilt mantra. And if you look in history, only a very small percentage of Americans even own slaves. It's like 7%. And I have a census that you can look up yourself from 1860 that proves that. So for this little bitty minority, every white in America, and what if you came here after? I mean, my grandpa came here from Holland in the early 1900s. He's the only one that came from Holland. There are no, that I know of, black hookstras. I mean, I don't believe we owned any slaves ever. How is my family? Oh no, it's because they built America. I don't. There's a lot that went into building this country. There were other slaves, whites, indentured servants, blah blah. You know it all. But yet, for some reason, they pushed that mantra on us, and I just don't understand it. And so many of ours fall for it.
not optimistic about bringing about major redistributive change through the courts. The institution just isn't structured that way.
You know why the courts won't do it? Because it's unconstitutional. You cannot take from the fruits of another man's labor and give it to him in the United States of America. You have the right to your property that you earned. See, it's unconstitutional. These two cannot coexist. Social justice and our form of government as we have it cannot coexist no matter what fantasies these socialist Democrats want to sell you. They cannot.
You just look at very rare examples where during the desegregation era, the court was willing to, for example, order changes that cost money to a local school district. And the court was very uncomfortable with it. It was hard to manage. It was hard to figure out. You start getting into all sorts of separation of powers issues, in terms of the court monitoring or engaging in a process that essentially is administrative and takes a lot of time.
So he entered the White House with this motivation and then told you 5 days beforehand exactly what he was going to do.
We are 5 days away from fundamentally transforming the United States of America.
The court's just not very good at it, and politically, it's very hard to legitimize opinions from the court in that regard. So, I think that although you can craft theoretical justifications for it legally, I think you can. Any three of us sitting here could come up with a rationale for bringing about economic change through the courts.
I hope you now see what social justice really is and the deception that was pulled over we the people in the United States of America, and that this is not freedom, but theft is what happened at a grand scale in our White House. And the Clintons were accomplices, the Bushes. They have infiltrated both parties globalists to weaken America so that we would have to give in to the United Nations and their one world movement. That's what this is.